Hi everyone, it's Darius Bucher, owner of Integral Forest Management and Canadian rep for RTI, the makers of Teabag Fertilizer. So, you've gone out this spring, you've planted your trees, you've used RTI Teabag Fertilizer, and now it's the fall and it's time to assess exactly what happened out there. So the purpose of this video is to show you how to do just that, so that I can key you in exactly what to look for to know, so that you can know that you are getting the maximum benefit from your fertilizer. All right, so let's go take a look. All right, so before we get started and going out and taking a look at the trees, first we want to make sure that we have all the tools that we're going to need to properly assess them. Of course, the first thing, and this goes without saying, I don't know any silviculture forester out there who goes for a walk without a planting shovel and have the ability to dig up some trees and take a look at what's going on below the surface of the soil. The other thing, of course, that you're going to want to have is a camera. You're going to want to take pictures. Take a look at trees where things worked out, where things didn't work out, and compare them if you left any controls. The best way to do it, pictures say 1,000 words. If you collect any data, they're going to help bring more light to what that data is saying to you. Other things to bring: a pair of pruners for sampling foliage. And of course, we're wanting to look at the ground level diameter of our trees. We're going to want to have a set of calipers. And if you're collecting foliage samples, you're going to need a Ziploc bag and a felt pen to label the bag so that you don't get your samples mixed up. So these are the tools that you're going to want to bring out and first of all make sure that you have before you even go out in the field. Okay, so now we have all the right tools that we need, but before we even go out in the field, there's something that we want to do in the office before we take a look at the trees. The first thing that we want to look at, of course, and assess, and this is something that people often don't think about doing, is to look at the weather and see what it was like around the time of planting. If you ended up in a situation where you had drought, where you had extremely hot weather, and the needles and the leaders are extending into a situation where the vapor pressure deficit is such that the trees can't keep up pulling moisture out of the soil, you could end up with a lot of mortality. So you're going to want to know what's causing that mortality. Here on this particular site, we had an awesome spring. We had rain right up until the middle of June, right up into July, even a smattering towards the beginning of August. And even though it's dried out since that particular time, for seedlings, it's been a great growing season. So I would expect to see good results here. But knowing what your weather was doing around the time of planting is going to help to determine why your trees look the way that they do at the end of a growing season. It's an important factor not to look past. Okay, so you've gone through the weather, you've assessed what the weather was like around the time that the seedlings were planted and as they've been growing. The next thing you want to do, the very first thing that you want to do when you're on site, is address and assess what are the site limiting factors. In this particular case, I definitely have some vegetation competition. If a tree, for instance, was planted deep into vegetation competition and it didn't have a chance to get the light that it needed to be able to grow, then you're probably not going to see a good result as an open-grown seedling, even if you use Teabag fertilizer. I would especially want to be looking at what my site limiting factors were on dry sites. Even if I site prep them, was the site prep enough to adequately address soil moisture issues and shading issues if I ended up in a drought situation around the time of planting of the seedlings, or even a late prolonged summer drought? So assessing your sites, knowing what those site limiting factors are, is extremely important to understanding whether you're getting the benefit of the Teabag fertilizer or not. You always have to remember that it is part of your silviculture regime. It is not going to take over other site limiting factors that are a part of your regime that you need to address, such as soils or competing vegetation. Okay, now it's time to take a look at some trees and see what happened during the growing season. This tree that I'm looking at right now happens to be a control tree that was not fertilized at the time of planting. So what are things that I'm looking at with regards to this tree when I'm assessing it? Well, first thing, of course, microsite. And I'm thinking about, what was my competing vegetation like? Was it protected by any logs or stumps or anything like that? What were my moisture conditions like during the growing season around this tree? Is this an organic type soil that holds a lot of moisture? Or is it going to dry out during the growing season? Those kind of things help dictate and help me to understand whether I was able to get the maximum benefit out of the fertilizer or not. Now, once again, in this particular case, this tree was not fertilized, and here's what it looks like. So the first thing I'm going to look at, now I'm going to look at the seedling. Well, the first thing I'm looking at, of course, I'll put my hand behind it, is color. What is the tone of green that I'm looking at? Is it dark green? Is it a yellowish green? Or is it something in between? So that's going to help you to assess whether trees are taking up fertilizer or not. The second thing I'm looking at, of course, is my foliage. In this particular case, I'll put my hand by it again. But what is the needle length like of these seedlings, of the new growth that happened this year? Am I seeing full branching all the way up and down the tree? What is my foliar biomass going to look like? Because of course, foliar biomass dictates how much sugar is produced, which is going to dictate the growth of your seedling, including the roots beneath the ground. Last thing, of course, caliper, and that's why I have these. Ground level diameter, I would be measuring at least 25 controls, 25 treatment trees to get a rough average to see what the differences are, to see if I'm seeing a difference in growth rate as far as diameter is concerned. The most important thing to remember is that when trees get the nutrients from the fertilizer, they are taking them up and they are going to use them to build foliage. Foliage is going to, of course, create sugar, and that sugar is going to build your caliper. Many people make the mistake of looking at height. That's the wrong thing to go to. Height growth is like top priority for a seedling to get its above its competing vegetation. Even if seedlings are in a weak state, they will try and put on height. The bottom line is what it wants to do is to build foliar capacity, to capture the site, to overcome the competing vegetation, and to build a nice, firm, strong caliper so it can stand up and be resistant to anything that's trying to compete around it. So caliper is going to send you the biggest message whether your trees are getting the fertilizer or not. So let's just take a look at the caliper of this seedling. So just taking these, putting them at the base of the tree, and just taking a quick look. That's all you need to do. And of course, even though we're not looking particularly at leader length being the priority, it's also a good idea to take the heights of your trees. When you take the height and the diameters, you can calculate volume, and it's an awesome surrogate for what the overall biomass of the seedling looks like. Now, of course, last but not least, what's going on below the surface? Let's take a look. Try and dig this tree out gently and nicely so that I'm getting the roots and not cutting them off. And I would like to put it back in the soil again. Hopefully it will survive my abuse. But if I can preserve the roots, then will certainly help. So let's take a look and see what's going on. So, very dry soils at this particular time of year, but you know, it's September now, and these trees, they've got their waxy cuticles. They hardened up during that period when they were growing this spring, when it was wet. They hardened up since that time. They can take a dry period at this time because they're not really transpiring that much. They have good control in their foliage because of those waxy cuticles. So this gives you a rough idea of what a control root system looks like in this particular case. So roots are getting out to the side, but as you can see, mostly down, and that tells me where the soil moisture was lying as the summer continued to go on. All right, now I've got a tree that was fertilized at the time of planting. I tried to pick one that was in a similar situation to the control that I looked at. And I'm wanting to see if there's any differences between treatment and control. It's always a good idea to leave a control. Treatment tree, color. Liking that. But the one thing that I notice is, even though the color might be a bit darker green here, is look at the length of growth, but look at the needle length. And the needle length, of course, as I was telling you, that trees are going to use the nutrients to build foliage, which will build their photosynthetic capacity, which is what is going to give them the ability to grow not just this season, but into the future. The other very important thing about the needles is the fact that they are storing nutrients that the tree is going to use for growth first thing next spring. Even if you only see subtle differences between treatment and control trees after year 1, year 2 is really the time to come back and take a very close look at it, because that is the time period when the trees have been able to take up and utilize their fertilizer for growth. And that's when the biggest differences are going to start to show up. And I can tell you over time through my trials, my oldest, of which is 20 years old now, is those tiny differences that seem insignificant during year 1 continue to exponentially grow as time goes on. And the difference between treatment control continues to widen, and it will go through right to rotation. Now, next thing we want to look at, of course, is the caliper of the tree. We'll be measuring that. Nice thick caliper on this one. And let's dig it up and see what the roots were doing in this situation. The things I like about the microsite of the selection of this seedling is the fact that it was backed up against this coarse woody vegetation, coarse woody debris. That's important to help preserve moisture, and organic matter is really key for soil biology and getting it in contact with the root system of the tree, because that's ultimately going to help feed your tree over the longer term once the fertilizer is used up. This one doesn't want to come out. I like that. That's a good thing. When you're having to rip on them and they're not wanting to budge, that's a good feeling. This tree is not wanting to come out. Great planting shovel. Okay, well, let's take a look at that root system and compare it to the control tree. I think that you will notice quite clearly, and a lot of roots are cut off because a lot of roots are fine roots and they break off quite easily when you're digging a seedling up, but you can see quite clearly that the biomass of the root system on this seedling is much greater than the control. Now that is a fertilized seedling. Here is a seedling that absolutely 100% got the benefit of the fertilizer. This is just awesome. Really like this microsite. this is one of the things that you're wanting to pay attention to, and thinking about the performance of this seedling versus the treated tree that I just took a look at. Look at what it's up against. This stump. This stump helps protect it from competing vegetation. It has a lot of organic matter around it, which also helps the seedling draw more nutrients out of the soil. It's a lot easier for it to get its roots out. And the stump is also a protection that helps hold moisture during the summertime, during a prolonged drought. The better the microsite, the better performance of your seedling. So what you're wanting to do, if I see a tree like this versus the one I just saw, this sends me a message. If I'm wanting to get the best possible performance out of my fertilizer on these types of sites, I'm going to want to protect it from competing vegetation, make sure it has access to organic matter, and also try and hold the moisture as much as possible. So putting it around obstacles like stumps is absolutely 100% key. If your trees are sitting out in the open, just like she showed you with the other one, you can't expect as good a result. The other thing note about this tree, it grew twice. This is lammus growth, this little section in here. This is the second growth that it's put on this season. Here's the initial growth. I mean, this is a very skookum seedling that's just ready to go. I can only imagine what this is going to look like at the end of year 2 when it can use all the fertilizer that it's got stored up. So, well, just like with the other ones, can't forget to do this, but let's take a look at what's going on underneath as well. I mean, once again, I'm seeing the needle length, I'm seeing a dark color, I'm seeing a lot of foliage. Good things are happening up top. I can only anticipate the good things that are happening below the soil. See if I can dig this one up without hurting it too badly. I certainly don't want to ruin this tree. You know, there are certain trees at times when you're digging them up, especially your controls. You take a look at them and you feel like when you dig them up, you're actually doing them a favor if you don't put them back in the ground again and put them out of their misery. When they're not planted properly, that is. Here we go, see if I can get it all as much as possible out of here. Bang all this organic matter off it without losing all the roots. Or if they're all getting torn off into the organic matter here. Anyways, it's holding on very nicely, so that kind of gives me the indication of, but you can see roots going in every which direction. This was just, you can only imagine the big hairy mass of roots that goes out beyond this into that organic matter, which is holding moisture and nutrients. The one direction that you'll notice the roots didn't grow, and you'll see if you come in really closely here, there's the remnants of the tea bag. And of course, roots can't grow in to the fertilizer. It's a little bit too hot. There's no growing medium there for them to get access to, no moisture or anything. So, but you can see, despite that, getting the fertilizer in close, giving the tree the nutrients it needs right away, what kind of a root system that you can obtain. And this root system's only going to get bigger and more productive as time goes on. All right, for those of you who want to take it to another level and really learn about your trees, another way that you can determine how the nutrients are going into your seedling is to collect a foliar sample of the current year's growth and to send it away to a lab. I can give you the lab information and my contact information will be the end of this video, but that's another way you can see what's going on inside of the seedling. So I'll just quickly demonstrate what I would want to do in order to collect foliage. So, as I was stating, current year, I don't want stuff way down here or from the previous year that was grown in the nursery. Current year only. So I'd snip this little sprig off, put it in my bag. Of course, before I came out, felt pen, you'd want to label the bag, which sample that is. And I would be wanting, you're just wanting to take one little branchlet per seedling. And I would be doing it for like 25 trees of treatment, 25 trees of control, and then you'll be able to see the difference. The other thing that's really neat about what I find is when I'm collecting foliage is that you're going to be moving the tree around at the base. You're going to be touching its foliage. You're going to see how big it is. I can tell you that when you put treatment and control beside each other, you're going to see color differences in the foliage. You're going to see biomass differences in the foliage. And as you pull your tree around, you should be feeling that your fertilized trees are much stiffer at the base than the controls. So it's just another way of being able to assess things and know that you're getting the benefit of the treatment that you're applying. And of course, don't forget, pictures are worth 1,000 words. I'd be taking pictures of sort of what your typical control tree looks like, typical treatment tree looks like. Then you can take them back to the office. When you're looking at the data, it just brings that much more clarity to the situation and helps you assess the benefit of fertilizing at the time of planting with RTI Teabag Fertilizer. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. I hope that this gives you a good idea of how to assess your trees and to tell whether you're getting the benefit of the fertilizer or not. Not only that, just to assess the quality of your site that you're putting your trees into and how you can put together a full, complete silviculture regime where your trees are going to benefit to their maximum. So if you have any questions, please feel free to call me at any time. You can get a hold of me at integralfm@telus.net. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.